5 seconds of doctored audio nearly destroyed Jasmine Crockett's career in a federal courtroom. But within just 5 minutes, she made Chief Justice John Roberts declare, "I've misunderstood this law for 30 years. If justice can be manipulated that easily, how many innocent people have already been convicted because of a single edited clip?" Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The cold stabbed through the marble steps like a warning. Reporters had been outside since dawn. Inside, every seat was taken. Senators, aides, press. They didn't come for justice. They came to watch Jasmine Crockett fall. And then, heels, measured, steady. She entered alone, no staff, no entourage. Just one folder and eyes that didn't blink. She didn't look at anyone, didn't smile. Every step said, "I'm not here to ask permission." People watched, waiting for her to break. She didn't. She sat like she belonged there more than any of them. Like she'd come not to defend, but to expose. Then the doors opened. Silence fell. Chief Justice John Roberts entered, robes sweeping, eyes sharp. He moved like power personified. His gaze found Jasmine, held it, and then the first strike. "Ms. Crockett, let's be clear. This is a courtroom, not your press room." Laughter followed. Quiet, cutting. A few smirks, a few stifled chuckles. It was meant to rattle her. It didn't. She stayed still, eyes forward. Because silence in the right hands is not surrender. It's strategy. The judge's nod was barely perceptible, but to Elliot Drayton, it was a curtain rising. He stood with practiced ease, shoulders squared, jacket smooth, voice locked and ready. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. His authority came not from force, but from precision. "Members of the jury," he began, walking toward them with slow, deliberate steps. "What you're about to hear may sound like politics, but it's not. This case isn't about debate or disagreement. It's about boundaries and what happens when a public official crosses them." His fingers held up a single page, the text enlarged in bold type. "On February 15th, during a televised White House press briefing, Ms. Jasmine Crockett said, 'Our northern trade rivals are on their knees thanks to President Trump's tariff brilliance.'" He let it land. The silence afterward wasn't just polite, it was loaded. "That's not neutral analysis," he continued. "That's not government transparency. That is praise packaged as policy, and it was delivered on the American taxpayer's dime." He turned slightly, pacing now. Not nervously, but like someone laying the final tiles of a trap. "Now, the Hatch Act doesn't ban federal employees from speaking," he explained, his tone tightening. "It bans them from campaigning while acting in their official capacity, from using their position to influence elections or promote specific political figures. That line between service and partisanship is sacred. And when someone speaks from the White House podium with that kind of language, they're not just breaking protocol, they're breaking the law." He placed the transcript on the evidence table, his movements controlled, as if setting down a weapon. "But that's not the full picture," he added, glancing toward the judge. "Not even close." A shift in tone, a shift in posture. He stepped back to his table and opened a locked silver case. "This morning," he said, drawing breath, "my office received additional material, a short audio recording, submitted by an anonymous source. We have not yet verified its technical origin, but its content, well, let's just say it speaks louder than any document ever could." The courtroom tensed. Jurors leaned forward. Even the judge narrowed his gaze. Drayton held up the flash drive between his fingers, like a loaded round. "The voice you're about to hear is unmistakably Ms. Crockett's, captured off microphone, seconds after the same briefing. No teleprompters, no press agents, just her, unfiltered." He crossed the room, inserted the drive into the courtroom laptop, and stood back. The screen flickered. Static burst from the speakers. Then her voice, calm, low, and devastatingly clear. "They deserve it. Anyone against America deserves what's coming." It was 5 seconds long, but it hit like a detonation. One juror exhaled through clenched teeth. Another scribbled something hastily. A whisper spread from the back of the gallery to the front like a slow rising wind. Even a seasoned congressional reporter flinched, glancing toward the defense table with eyebrows raised. Drayton stood still, letting the silence crawl. Then, without looking away from the jury, he said, "That was not analysis. That was not context. That was retribution. It wasn't said to inform. It was said to punish." He let the words hang like smoke. When a federal official, speaking with the full weight of the U.S. government behind her, declares that dissent deserves consequences, that's no longer public communication. That's weaponized speech. He turned slightly, his voice sharpening. She wasn't targeting a policy. She was targeting people, Americans, foreign allies, journalists, lawmakers, anyone she disagreed with. He pointed to the screen, still paused on the waveform of her voice. And she didn't say it in a moment of passion. She said it in a moment of privacy, when she thought no one was listening, but someone was. By now, the courtroom was no longer reacting. It was reeling. The press gallery had gone from quiet note-taking to frantic messaging. The jurors sat back, some arms folded, others stunned still. Drayton saw it. He stepped forward again, voice now just above a whisper. "This is exactly why the Hatch Act exists. Not just to prevent slogans at press briefings, but to stop power from becoming permission. To protect the American people from the slow erosion of law into personal agenda." He turned once more to face the bench. "Your Honor, we recognize that anonymous submissions must be scrutinized, but the court heard what we heard. 5 seconds, 5 words, and a window into intent that no transcript could ever show." His tone dropped further. "And now the question isn't whether Ms. Crockett violated a statute, it's whether this courtroom is willing to pretend she didn't." And across the aisle, Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still. Eyes forward, no fidgeting, no outrage. But behind that silence was something stronger than anger. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't shaken. She had expected this exact moment, every ounce of it, because she knew truth can be manipulated, but doubt only needs one seed to grow. The prosecutor's words still echoed when the judge looked toward the defense table and said, "Ms. Crockett, you may respond." It was a loaded invitation, and everyone knew it. The gallery was leaning forward, jurors still processing the 5-second clip, and even the court stenographer had paused her typing for a breath. All eyes were on Jasmine, but she didn't move right away. She remained seated, her fingers gently resting on the leather folder in front of her, as if she were waiting for the noise to settle in people's heads before speaking into the silence that would follow. Then, without urgency, she rose. No flinch, no tight jaw. Just calm, controlled. She picked up the folder and walked toward the center like a woman crossing a battlefield, not a courtroom. Every step echoed like punctuation. She stopped. The folder remained closed in her hands. Her eyes swept once, only once, across the jury, then straight to the judge. Her voice, when it came, was even, clear, sharper than anything said that morning. "If this were a performance," she said, pausing between each word, "I would congratulate the prosecution." The words hung in the air, razor-edged. A few heads in the gallery turned sharply. Because what Mr. Drayton just gave us was a master class in theatrical storytelling. She looked down briefly, then back up. But unfortunately for him, this isn't theater. This is a court of law. The tension snapped. The room shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Something had changed. The mockery from earlier? Gone. The smirks? Faded. Because now she had the floor, and no one was laughing. She let that silence stretch just long enough to seize control of the tempo. "We're not here to review a script. We're here to examine facts, context, law." She raised the folder slightly, not for drama, but as a quiet declaration of readiness. "And while the prosecution is busy playing audio clips without timestamps, submitted by someone we can't identify, I've brought receipts, verified, documented, auditable." Her gaze moved to the jury again. "You've been asked to react to 5 seconds. I'll be asking you to understand 5 years of public service, of process, and of law that actually matters." She placed the folder on the evidence table, opened it with precise fingers, and pulled out a page. Not shaking, not defensive, just surgical. Every person in that courtroom could feel it now. She wasn't scrambling. She wasn't cornered. She was prepared. The calm wasn't just confidence, it was conviction. She didn't come to explain herself. She came to dismantle an accusation built on fragments and show the difference between speculation and proof. The air had changed, not in volume, but in weight. And for the first time that morning, the question wasn't what she had said. It was whether the court had ever truly been ready to hear her at all. Jasmine didn't move immediately after placing the folder on the table. She let the air settle again, made the courtroom lean into the silence, not away from it. Then with quiet precision, she picked up the first page from her file and held it up for the jury to see. "Let's stop dancing around what this case is supposedly about," she said, her voice steady, unshaken. "Let's go directly to the source." At the top of the page in bold letters were the words, Hatch Act of 1939. She turned slightly toward the jury. "This is the law the prosecution believes I violated. So let's read it. Not interpret it, not spin it, not dramatize it. Just read it." She took one step closer to the jury box, held the page at chest level, and began. Section 5.2 of the Hatch Act states, "An employee may not use their official authority or influence for the purpose of interfering with or affecting the result of an election." Her tone was slow and surgical. "And that's it. That's the rule. The entire case hinges on whether or not I cross this line." She lowered the page, looked each juror in the eye, not to pressure them, but to tether the moment to reality. "So ask yourselves, did anything I said, on camera, on the record, encourage a vote, ask for a donation, support a candidate for elected office?" She shook her head once gently. "No. What I gave that day was a factual update on the results of a trade policy, not a campaign speech, not an endorsement, just a policy report." She returned to the table and laid out a second sheet. "This is the full transcript of that press briefing, every word, every question, every answer." She didn't wave it for effect. She simply pointed. "No edits, no anonymous clips, no mystery flash drives, just the complete, verifiable truth." She slid the page closer to the jury. "You won't find any slogans here. You won't find any electioneering. What you will find is data, summarized and delivered in accordance with my responsibility as a federal communications officer." Her tone tightened slightly. "But somehow that duty has now been twisted into something criminal. Because I didn't stutter, because I spoke clearly, because I didn't dilute the facts for someone else's comfort." Now the silence was different. It wasn't uncertain. It was contemplative. People were thinking, recalculating. Jasmine could feel it. She didn't let up. "The prosecution wants you to believe that I violated the Hatch Act because I said our northern trade rivals were struggling. They called it promotional. I call it factual. At the time of that briefing, the Department of Commerce had already published a report showing a measurable decline in northern trade surplus due to tariff adjustments. That's public information. That's what I was referring to." She tapped the document once, softly. "If we criminalize federal employees for referencing accurate government data in briefings, we don't just silence voices, we sabotage transparency." She paused, not for effect, but to let it land. Then she lifted one final sheet from her folder. "And since the prosecution wants to reduce this trial to 5 seconds of audio," she said, locking eyes with the jury, "let me give you the entire sentence they clipped." She cleared her throat and read directly from the official transcript. "Some might say they deserve the consequences of opposing our trade policy, but our job is to lead, not to gloat." She looked back up. "That's the quote. Full stop. That's what I actually said. They played 5 words. They deserve it. Anyone against America deserves what's coming." And they stopped right before the point, right before the part where I called for restraint, not retribution, for leadership, not arrogance. "Now let's address the real reason this case exists," she said, eyes locking on to the prosecution table. "It's not because I praised a sitting president. It's not because I violated election law. It's because I'm not the kind of spokesperson they expected to speak with authority. Because when someone like me stands at that podium and speaks plainly, it makes the wrong people uncomfortable. And instead of challenging my facts, they questioned my right to speak them." Her voice didn't tremble. It sharpened. But the Hatch Act wasn't written to police discomfort. It was written to protect the democratic process. And I did nothing to interfere with it. She turned slightly, now addressing not just the jury, but the whole room. There was no call to vote, no political fundraising, no partisan language. I didn't use my position to sway an election. I used it to report results. She gestured calmly to the folder. The courtroom was still caught in the silence Jasmine had created. A different kind of silence this time. Not one of doubt, but of discomfort. Controlled discomfort. She saw it, and she stepped right into it. And now, she began, her voice lower, calmer, but with a new kind of pressure behind it. Let's deal with the so-called centerpiece of this prosecution, the 5-second audio clip. She took a few slow steps forward, but not toward the jury this time, toward the bench. The anonymous recording that came in on a flash drive slipped under someone's door in a manila envelope like it was part of a thriller novel. She paused, tilted her head slightly. Tell me, Your Honor, are we supposed to accept that? No one breathed, not even the judge. Jasmine reached for the flash drive, now resting on the evidence table, holding it up between her fingers like it was contaminated. Let me walk you through what we don't know about this file. We don't know who recorded it. We don't know when it was recorded. We don't know what device was used or whether the clip was spliced, looped, or manipulated. There's no metadata, no raw file, no forensic verification, and, most importantly, no chain of custody. She let those last 4 words drop like iron. She turned now, slowly, toward the jury. If I handed you a random envelope on the street with 5 words clipped from someone's voicemail and told you it was proof of a crime, would you convict them? Would you send them to prison because an unnamed stranger told you to believe it? Her tone never wavered, because that's what's being asked of you now, to ignore everything else, transcripts, context, public record, and trust a ghost in the system. Then she pivoted back to Roberts. The shift in energy was sharp, like a cold wind through marble. Your Honor, she said, voice steady but unmistakably direct. If this court accepts that file, without source, without verification, without even an affidavit of origin, then we are not adjudicating law anymore. Her words cut clean, precise. We are validating hearsay, institutionalizing manipulation, and opening the door to a precedent that will haunt every courtroom that follows this one. The judge stared down at her, but she didn't blink. This isn't just about me, she continued. This is about whether truth can still survive in a room where proof is optional. About whether we still have a justice system or just a performance system where whatever creates the best headline becomes admissible reality. She lifted the flash drive again, then laid it down slowly in front of the bench. Because if this becomes your evidence standard, then anyone can be destroyed by 5 seconds of audio in a well-timed leak. And no one, not me, not you, not anyone, will be safe from that precedent. She took a single step closer. And that's why, she said, firm, unwavering, eyes locked with the Chief Justice, if we accept a nameless, unverifiable audio clip as admissible evidence, then this is no longer a courtroom governed by law. She didn't flinch. It's a political stage, and I won't act in someone else's script. The room cracked under the weight of those words. You could hear it, not in noise, but in absence. The scribbles stopped. The jurors sat still, hands motionless. Even the gallery of political insiders and media regulars, people used to spin, used to spectacle, looked shaken, because this wasn't spin, it was exposure. Jasmine turned back to the jury, her voice softer now, but more dangerous in its calm. You were shown 5 seconds. I've shown you the full sentence. You were given a mystery file. I've given you government transcripts. You were asked to speculate. I've asked you to verify. Then after a pause, she finished, not with volume, but with gravity. So ask yourselves, what kind of justice are we building? If 5 unverified seconds now outweigh 5 years of service, 5 pages of truth, and 1 line that no one wanted you to hear. Our job is to lead, not to gloat. But just as Jasmine lowered herself back into her chair, the prosecution's table erupted. Objection, Your Honor! Drayton's voice cracked through the silence like a rifle shot. His composure, once surgically calm, was gone. He shot to his feet so fast his chair skidded backwards with a metallic screech. "This is a distraction," he barked, one hand raised, the other trembling as it clutched his notes. "Counsel is undermining the integrity of the evidence without any formal forensic rebuttal. She's making a speech, not a legal argument." His face flushed red, eyes darting from the judge to the jury like a man watching control slip through his fingers. "This courtroom is not a place for conspiracy theories or political posturing," he growled, his voice rising now, almost desperate. "She can't just declare something inadmissible because she doesn't like it." The room held its breath as Drayton kept going, not waiting for permission. "That recording, anonymous or not, contains her voice, her exact tone, her exact words, and everyone in this courtroom knows it." He jabbed a finger at the flash drive Jasmine had set down. "This isn't about metadata. It's about accountability. We heard her say it. They deserve it." He was pacing now, unraveling by the second. "She wants this jury to believe 5 seconds don't matter? That accountability depends on how evidence arrives instead of what it reveals." He pointed at the jury box now, breath short. "Don't let her rewrite reality just because she's good with words." But the damage was done. The contrast between Jasmine's precision and Drayton's eruption was stark. Undeniable. Where she had been calm, he was frantic. Where she had been fact-driven, he was fuming. Even the jurors who had been leaning toward the prosecution were now shifting back in their seats, visibly unsettled by his sudden heat. Roberts raised a hand slowly, commanding silence with a glance. But the silence this time wasn't procedural. It was a verdict in motion. Because Drayton wasn't objecting to misconduct. He was objecting to losing control. Following Drayton's outburst and the judge's firm call for order, the courtroom once again turned to Jasmine, who hadn't flinched, hadn't moved. She waited just long enough for the air to settle, then rose from her chair, her voice calm but charged like a coiled wire. "Since we're now debating what the law allows and what it doesn't," she said, walking slowly to the center of the room again, "then we must talk about precedent." Her fingers slid another document from the folder, one marked in blue tabs and legal citations. "There is one case the prosecution failed to mention, probably because it dismantles the foundation of their entire argument." Her tone sharpened. "Jenkins v. U.S. Civil Ethics Commission, 2018. She stepped toward the jury box, holding the page up. "In that ruling, the Court of Appeals determined that the Hatch Act could not, and I quote, be retrofitted to prosecute modern expressions of political tone, absent direct, demonstrable electioneering." She turned toward the judge, gaze unflinching. "That case was about a public health official who criticized congressional inaction during a policy update. The Ethics Commission claimed it was partisan. The court ruled it was protected speech." Her voice was stronger now, cutting through the tension like glass through cloth. "Why? Because no funds were solicited. No candidates were endorsed. No campaigns were referenced. It was ruled, not a violation." She let the words drop like a gavel. She took a few steps, pacing slowly now. "The Jenkins decision clarified that the Hatch Act is not a net to catch uncomfortable words. It is a wall to stop institutional abuse of electoral power. The difference matters." She turned sharply. "What I said was no different. I reported the results of a federal policy, not a campaign, not an attack ad. And just like Jenkins, I'm being painted as partisan for refusing to dull the truth to make others feel safe." Her hand tapped the case law firmly. "But precedent protects us all, especially when the law is at risk of becoming someone's weapon of convenience." Now the courtroom felt different again, not shaken, but listening, respectfully, intently. Because Jasmine wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was defending the rule of law from being twisted to fit a narrative. The silence that followed was not the same one that had settled earlier, when Jasmine first walked in or when the audio clip played. This time it was heavier, but not with accusation, with respect. Something had shifted, tangibly. What had started as an ambush trial had slowly, deliberately transformed into a masterclass in restraint, clarity, and forceful intellect. For a long moment, no one moved. Not the jurors, not the press, not the judge. The entire room, once buzzing with anticipation of a public defeat, now sat frozen under the weight of something no one had expected, truth that refused to be politicized. At the bench, Chief Justice Roberts finally stirred. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned back in his leather chair, brought a hand to his forehead, and rubbed gently, like a man recalculating the meaning of everything he had just witnessed. His other hand moved to the transcript Jasmine had entered into the record. He didn't scan it. He read it, line by line. From the opening remarks of the February 15th press briefing, through the exchange with the reporters, down to the sentence that had become the eye of the storm. Some might say they deserve the consequences of opposing our trade policy, but our job is to lead, not to gloat. Roberts narrowed his eyes, staring at the paper like it had personally betrayed him. Then he read it again. The words had a gravity that no 5-second clip could replicate. The fuller sentence didn't sound angry. It didn't sound like propaganda. It sounded like leadership wrapped in realism, a hard truth delivered with restraint. When he finally looked up, his gaze was slower than usual, heavier, but it was also clearer, sharper. "Mr. Drayton," he said at last, his voice echoing through the still courtroom like a dropped pin in a cathedral. "Please approach the bench." The courtroom stirred slightly, barely, but enough. All eyes turned to the prosecution's table. Drayton froze mid-sentence, not speaking, but clearly working through a dozen responses in his head. His face, once resolute, now registered something new, uncertainty. He straightened his suit, smoothed his tie, and stood with the stiffness of a man who suddenly realized the spotlight was no longer in his favor. His steps were slow but purposeful as he approached the bench. Chief Justice Roberts didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Mr. Drayton," he began, eyes locked, tone dry as parchment. "This court has heard considerable argument today regarding the 5-second audio recording submitted by your office. Before we proceed further, I have one specific question for the record." He leaned slightly forward, both hands clasped in front of him. The gallery leaned with him. "Can you confirm the chain of custody for this recording?" Drayton blinked. For a man trained in rhetoric, this wasn't a complicated question. It was binary. But he didn't answer it immediately. His lips parted, his tongue darted once toward the corner of his mouth, and for the first time since the trial began, he didn't look prepared. "Well, Your Honor," he began slowly, "we received the file early this morning, prior to opening arguments, via an encrypted communication from a confidential source." Roberts raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "That's not what I asked." The tension doubled instantly. "I asked if you can confirm the chain of custody," Roberts repeated, firmer now. "Can you tell this court where the recording originated, who recorded it, when it was recorded, and whether it has remained unedited or unaltered in any way since its creation?" Drayton swallowed. Everyone saw it. "Your Honor, we haven't completed the full trace. The source, while credible, is anonymous, and our office has not yet completed authentication." "Then you cannot confirm the chain of custody," Roberts said flatly, his voice slicing through the air. Drayton's mouth opened to respond again, but he thought better of it. He simply nodded, barely. A thick pause followed, and with that, something subtle but irreversible happened in the room. The case began to fall apart, not by explosion, but by implosion. It didn't unravel in a dramatic outburst. It collapsed under the weight of its own weakness. The prosecution's crown jewel, its dramatic, high-impact, anonymous clip, was now officially without foundation, and the man who had wielded it so confidently minutes earlier now stood at the bench, exposed. Back at her table, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't gloat. She didn't even blink. Her fingers remained folded over her folder, still calm, still focused, because she had known this moment was coming. She had counted on it, and now it had arrived. The room no longer held silence. It held gravity, the kind that made men shift in their seats without knowing why, the kind that demanded stillness not out of fear, but out of reverence. Jasmine hadn't spoken for minutes, and yet every word she'd said earlier still hung in the air, like invisible scaffolding. Strong, unshaken. The judge had leaned back, elbow resting gently on the arm of his chair, one hand pressed to his brow, as if even he was struggling to reconcile what had just unfolded in his courtroom. Then came movement, subtle, deliberate. Roberts set down the page he'd been holding, removed his glasses with slow precision, folded them closed, and placed them gently on the bench like a man setting down something fragile. His fingers lingered there for a second. Then, without looking at anyone in particular, he said softly but firmly, "Ms. Crockett." Her name rang out like a bell. Jasmine looked up, calm, unwavering, no expectation in her eyes, only readiness. "I'll be candid with you," Roberts began, his voice carrying a texture that hadn't been there before. "When I took this bench for today's hearing, I had a different assumption in mind. I thought I'd be hearing a defense draped in partisanship, a political maneuver dressed in legal language. I assumed we were in for spin, calculated, careful, and empty." He paused, his gaze lifting directly to hers now. "But that's not what you brought into this courtroom." The tension deepened, sharp but silent. The reporters lowered their pens. Even Drayton didn't move. "You brought the law," Roberts continued, "line by line, section by section, and you didn't just recite it, you applied it, with precision, with restraint, with discipline." He gestured briefly to the documents on the bench before him. "You brought me the Hatch Act as written, not as distorted. You brought me Jenkins v. U.S. Civil Ethics Commission and reminded this court that statutes are not shaped by outrage, but by precedent and intention." Then his voice dropped slightly, but the weight of it only increased. The prosecution's central claim rested on a 5-second audio clip, delivered anonymously, without metadata, without timestamp, without authentication. His fingers tapped the flash drive lightly, twice like a gavel. That file, in this court's view, fails every standard of admissibility. It cannot be validated, its chain of custody does not exist, and its submission timing raises more questions than answers. It is therefore excluded from consideration in its entirety. The courtroom didn't gasp. It didn't need to. Roberts looked again to the transcript Jasmine had provided. He picked it up, scanned the lines silently, then read aloud, slowly for all to hear. "Some might say they deserve the consequences of opposing our trade policy, but our job is to lead, not to gloat." He set the paper down. "That," he said clearly, "is not a call to vote. It is not a campaign message. It is not an attempt to sway an election or fundraise or solicit partisan support. It is a message of restraint, a message of professionalism, and a direct contradiction to the accusation that Ms. Crockett violated the Hatch Act." His hands folded together now, his shoulders straight. "This court finds no evidence of electoral influence, no violation of federal statute, no abuse of office, and no legal justification to pursue this charge further." He paused. "Ms. Jasmine Crockett," he said, "you are found not liable under the Hatch Act." Somewhere in the gallery, a hand rose to cover a mouth. A juror slowly closed their eyes. The click of a camera shutter was the only sound daring to move. But Roberts wasn't finished. He exhaled slowly, as if shedding years of rigid thinking, and said something no one in that room, no one watching on the feed, no one reporting live, was prepared for. He looked directly at Jasmine, his voice softer now but more personal. "You made me reconsider something today, something I didn't expect to question. I've read the Hatch Act dozens of times. I've ruled on its application. I thought I knew its purpose." His gaze lingered. "But you reminded me that even statutes must be read with clarity, not convenience, that the law cannot be stretched to fit discomfort, only abuse." He sat back in his chair, quiet, contemplative, and then, in a voice that was almost reflective, he concluded, "You made me rethink my own understanding of this law." The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't a vacuum. It was full of vindication, full of reckoning, full of the realization that a single voice, clear, calm, unapologetic, had not only dismantled the prosecution's case, she had rewritten the assumptions of the very man who held the gavel. The gavel's final slam echoed long after the judge's words had hung in the air, but Jasmine Crockett made no show of triumph as the chamber slowly emptied. She gathered her folder with deliberate care, her expression neither joyous nor defiant, simply composed, like a soldier lowering her weapon after a long, hard-fought battle. As she stepped away from the defense table, her pace was measured, almost ritualistic. Every step echoed the weight of responsibility rather than the cheers of victory. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric, a blend of hushed admiration and speculative tension, as reporters surged forward like storm-driven waves, desperate for one more quote. "Is this a political victory?" someone shouted from a cluster of microphones and cameras, their voices mingling with the clamor of flashing bulbs. Jasmine paused at the threshold of the court's massive oak door, her eyes meeting the frantic gaze of the press gathered around the stairs. In that brief moment, time seemed to slow. The questions of the media hung in the air like suspended animation, heavy with expectation and controversy. With a calm yet resolute tone that cut through the cacophony, she replied, "No, this isn't a political victory." Her voice was low, measured, but unwavering, a declaration of principles that resonated far deeper than partisan triumph. "This," she continued, her gaze unwavering and voice imbued with the quiet intensity of resolute conviction, "is a victory for the rule of law." Every word she spoke carried the weight of centuries of legal tradition, the promise of fairness over spectacle, and the enduring belief that justice must be free from the sway of political manipulation. As reporters crowded around her, microphones thrust forward like spears seeking the heart of a truth. Jasmine's hands remained steady at her sides, a silent reminder that this battle was won not through grand gestures or applause, but through the meticulous construction of legal clarity. The press hounded her with rapid-fire questions, each one an eager attempt to capture a snippet of what, in public discourse, was deemed a monumental win. Yet despite their barrage, she maintained her composure, her eyes reflecting an inner fire tempered by years of experience on the front lines of justice. "Our system," she declared, her voice clear enough to be heard even over the clamor of chaos, "is not meant to reward flair or to foster a culture of political theatrics. It is designed to safeguard our democratic principles, ensuring that law and order prevail above raw emotion." Every syllable reverberated like a solemn promise that the truth, though hard-won, was the most enduring form of victory. In that moment, as the swirl of questions and camera flashes ebbed into an expectant silence, Jasmine's stance spoke volumes more than any grand proclamation might. Even as a cluster of television cameras zoomed in on her slowly receding figure, the sincerity in her tone and the determined set of her shoulders defied the conventional narrative of triumph. Her measured departure was not a retreat but an assertion, a calm assertion that justice, when executed with integrity and transparency, serves as a bulwark against the tide of populist demagoguery. The injustice she had faced in that courtroom, an injustice masked by selective editing, anonymous evidence, and political theatrics, was now countered by a profound reaffirmation of the rule of law. And though there was no raucous celebration, no jubilant cheers ringing down the hallways of justice, a new kind of applause was heard, one that resonated in the silent nods of jurors, the thoughtful glances of legal experts, and the quiet gratitude of everyday citizens who believed in fairness. Outside the courthouse, in the chilly morning air, thick with anticipation, her departure became a rallying cry for those who had long felt marginalized by a system that often bent the rules in favor of the powerful. People gathered around, not to celebrate a political victory, but to witness a cornerstone of democracy reaffirmed. A reminder that the true victory lay in holding every public official accountable to the highest standards of integrity. With each step she took, the cameras captured not just her image, but a resolve that transcended party lines, a strength that spoke of unyielding principle over fleeting popularity. The narrative that once sought to paint her as a partisan provocateur was now being rewritten in real time, a narrative that would serve as a beacon of hope for advocates of justice everywhere. Jasmine's measured reply to the press, that quiet but powerful declaration, "This is a victory for the rule of law," was not just a retort to a barrage of insistent questions. It was a statement of enduring truth, one that would echo far beyond the cold stone walls of the courthouse. In that charged moment, while the flash bulbs burst like constellations in the morning sky and voices fell to an expectant hush, it became clear. This was not about political wins or losses. It was about the preservation of a legal system meant to serve all people, regardless of the forces arrayed against them. Jasmine Crockett, by standing firm and speaking plain truth, had not only defended her own honor, she had defended the sanctity of the law itself. No sooner had the gavel's echo faded in the hushed courtroom than the digital sphere erupted, capturing every angle of Jasmine Crockett's unexpected victory and broadcasting it across countless devices worldwide. The once quiet corners of social media lit up like constellations in a midnight sky, hashtags cascading through feeds at breathtaking speed. Honor, voice of reason, Shakri, modernize, the Hatch Act, Zaina, true justice, each one amplifying the incredulity and admiration swirling around her name. Journalists who had arrived expecting a swift condemnation suddenly found themselves scrambling to file breaking stories about the woman who dismantled a case built on 5 seconds of nameless audio, leaving the prosecution shaken and exposed. The trial video, clipped into bite-sized segments by eager netizens, went viral in a matter of hours, each highlight reel casting fresh light on Jasmine's unwavering calm and surgical arguments. Influencers who typically chased clickbait were now dissecting legal precedents, discussing free speech boundaries, and examining whether America's statutes were outdated relics ripe for political exploitation. All over Twitter and beyond, a spontaneous wave of commentary began emerging from ordinary citizens, some praising Jasmine as the hero they never knew they needed, others confessing surprise that the justice system could still produce such clarity when confronted by raw determination. Public polls popped up across major networks, their questions blunt and urgent. Is the Hatch Act too broad, too vague, used as a political cudgel rather than a legislative shield? Even talk shows known more for celebrity gossip than civic discourse pivoted their segments to the real substance behind Jasmine's defense, inviting seasoned legal analysts to parse every one of her statements. As the hours stretched, the intensity only grew, turning that once obscure technical statute into a top trending topic, while the calm in which Jasmine had faced the storm became the symbolic heart of a national conversation. Before long, the energy reached beyond Washington's borders, seeping into living rooms, college dorms, and even rural communities far removed from the capital's daily political theatrics. Clusters of neighbors found themselves huddled over smartphones, debating the meaning of Jasmine's full quote. Some might say they deserve the consequences of opposing our trade policy, but our job is to lead, not to gloat. And realizing how drastically it differed from the cherry-picked snippets circulated to cast her in a villainous light. Political science students, energized by the spectacle, organized late-night Zoom sessions to dissect Jenkins v. U.S. Civil Ethics Commission, 2018, referencing how Jasmine drew on that precedent to defend her stance with surgical precision. Even the older generation, some of whom admitted they had grown jaded by long cycles of hollow accusations and partisan brawls, reported feeling a spark of cautious optimism. Perhaps the law could be reclaimed from the jaws of political showmanship. Influential columnists, who normally centered their writing on polling data and scandal chasing, wrote impassioned op-eds praising Jasmine for reminding America that statutes remain only as robust as the integrity with which they're applied. Meanwhile, activists co-opted the number Voice of Reason hashtag to demand transparency in other cases, where fleeting, context-stripped evidence had been weaponized against people without the resources or eloquence to fight back. As national discourse expanded, voices from both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, found themselves reluctantly aligned on one point: the notion that the Hatch Act and laws like it might need modernizing to reflect 21st century political realities. But this wasn't some neat, bipartisan epiphany. It was a chaotic swirl of arguments, press releases, cable news segments, and fierce Twitter debates, all orbiting around one unstoppable fact. The woman they tried to label as a political offender had become a beacon of legal clarity instead. Seemingly overnight, Jasmine Crockett evolved from an unknown White House spokesperson to a symbol of reasoned defiance, her calm resolve now the rallying cry for anyone tired of seeing laws bent by those who treated them as rhetorical weapons. Indeed, the moment transcended standard partisanship and breathed new life into a skeptical public, many of whom had begun to suspect that courts had lost their backbone in the face of orchestrated political drama. In the midst of this national whirlwind, a single handwritten letter somehow managed to capture the raw humanity hidden behind all the legal intricacies and media buzz. It came from a retired combat veteran named Rick Connolly, a 58-year-old Texan who had watched the trial's livestream from his small ranch on the outskirts of Lubbock. Rick, who rarely spoke publicly about politics, found himself unexpectedly moved by Jasmine's composure and conviction, enough to put pen to paper for the first time in years. His letter was short, scrawled in blocky script on lined paper, but powerful. He thanked Jasmine for fighting with intellect and calm rather than fury or fear, saying her manner reminded him of what he believed the military stood for: clarity of mission and resolute honor in the face of chaos. When the letter surfaced on social media, somehow intercepted by a local news station that did a heartfelt segment on it, it further galvanized the wave of public interest. Veterans groups began posting messages of support, praising Jasmine for embodying the spirit of service that extends beyond politics or party affiliation. Disabled vets, spouses of active duty service members, and other Texans weighed in, expressing relief that maybe, just maybe, the system wasn't irreparably broken. Their voices amplified Rick's simple tribute to unstoppable proportions, proving that the trial had ignited more than just a legal debate. It sparked a reclamation of principles like honor, fairness, and accountability. As the letter gained traction online, a journalist from Houston wrote a moving editorial stating that Jasmine's determination was the kind of leadership we salute in uniform and the kind we desperately need in our civic institutions. Across social platforms, screenshots of Rick's humble, handwritten words quickly became a viral symbol of a broader sentiment: hope for a justice system guided by facts rather than political caricature, and admiration for a lone voice that had shattered a prosecutorial siege with unflinching poise. What began as an arcane legal skirmish had transformed into a cultural phenomenon, weaving together threads of law, patriotism, and personal integrity in a tapestry more robust than anyone could have imagined. The injustice Jasmine had faced, where a selectively edited clip and anonymous, unverifiable evidence nearly derailed her career, resonated with countless individuals who had felt marginalized by systems that favored influence over truth. Media commentators, typically hungry for sensational soundbites, found themselves compelled to shift focus from scandal to scholarship, inviting constitutional experts on air to discuss the significance of government speech and the critical role of context in determining intent. Legal blogs exploded with articles dissecting every strategic move Jasmine made, from referencing specific sections of the Hatch Act to her quiet but devastating takedown of the prosecution's chain of custody failures. Gradually, it dawned on the public that the real scandal was not her boldness, but the fact that the system allowed an unverified recording to claim so much power in the first place. This realization spurred countless calls for not just a modernization of the Hatch Act, but a broader reevaluation of how evidence is admitted in politically charged cases. Even those who still questioned her politics found themselves unable to deny the moral gravity of her stand against weaponized innuendo. The story became more than just one woman's defense. It was a raw, unfiltered testament to how easily the pillars of justice can be shaken when cynicism and convenience overshadow due process. Instead of being relegated to a minor footnote in the annals of political missteps, Jasmine's trial now stood as a clarion call, urging every citizen to examine the boundaries between law and theater, principle and propaganda, fear and fairness. Amid this nationwide uproar, hashtags like Voice of Reason and Modernize the Hatch Act burned like neon flares across every social platform, acting as rally points for people who, until recently, had felt disconnected from or even betrayed by the judicial system. Forums once devoted to petty debates over celebrity gossip suddenly found themselves peppered with discussions about textualism, statutory construction, and the constitutional concept of free speech within government roles. College debate teams seized on the trial as a real-world case study, not just in law, but in ethics, rhetoric, and the delicate balance between government transparency and political grandstanding. Amid the torrent of reactions and riposts, the veteran's letter from Texas glowed like a humble torch in the night, a reminder that beneath all the sophisticated arguments lay an undeniable truth. The rule of law is meant to protect, not to silence, and it must be wielded with caution and clarity lest it erode into a mere political tool. More than a few political figures, sensing the cultural shift, issued statements claiming they always believed in thorough legal scrutiny, though their records of championing such scrutiny were questionable at best. News outlets that once thrived on daily outrage found themselves forced to air interviews with constitutional scholars dissecting the subtle nuance that set Jasmine apart. Her unwavering refusal to turn facts into slogans or politics into warfare. Through it all, the trial's video feed, shared, retweeted, analyzed in every corner of the internet, remained the definitive artifact of a day when the system tried to quell a voice, only to be reminded of its own core obligations. While some viewers saw it as an indictment of a broken process, many more found hope in the simple possibility that one articulate, measured individual could still tip the scales back toward fairness. Long after the hashtags trended and the news cycle churned on, the memory of Jasmine's calm under the harshest spotlight endured, shaping dialogues from local PTA meetings to late-night Washington think tank sessions, all asking the same question. If the law can be reclaimed by reason once, can it be done again? The conversation around Jasmine's trial had exploded into a nationwide movement, with social media buzzing, talk shows debating, and even a retired veteran sending a heartfelt letter of gratitude. Yet beyond the hashtags and the viral clips, many wondered what deeper lesson lingered in the aftermath, what human truth lay beneath the layers of legal drama and political tension. Some stories end in a ringing of bells, anthems of triumph, or the shock of a falling gavel, but Jasmine's concluded on a quieter note, one that demanded the audience lean in rather than cheer. Perhaps that was the first lesson. Not all victories need fanfare. In that hushed finale, where the system conceded that laws must be interpreted with integrity, people saw a flicker of something more powerful than political outcomes. They saw dignity. Her case had reeked of injustice from the start, built on an anemic 5-second clip conjured by an unnamed source. Yet she refused to answer aggression with aggression, holding firm to a calm that defied all expectations of a performance. In doing so, she reminded everyone how easily public servants and the statutes that govern them can be manipulated by ambition, short-sightedness, or pure opportunism. The injustice she faced wasn't just personal, it was a mirror reflecting every time someone's words were twisted for gain. But that very injustice became a crucible, forging a broader message about resilience and moral fortitude. Her composure proved that rational argument, tethered to truth, can dismantle entire edifices of spin. But if there was one thread weaving through all her adversity, it was the unspoken question that haunted every corner of the trial. Is the law truly for everyone, or just for those who wield it most cleverly? Jasmine's journey exposed how a single act of selective editing, armed with bureaucratic momentum, could place an innocent public servant in the crosshairs. Through her eyes, the world glimpsed how easily the legal system can be tilted when a person's context is stripped away and replaced with sensational half-truths. Yet her steadfast stance, combined with her reverence for the law as it was written, spotlighted an even greater issue. Laws like the Hatch Act were designed to protect democracy, not to be harnessed as political weapons. By surviving that trial, she did more than vindicate herself. She reignited conversations about how laws must evolve alongside technology in modern discourse. It wasn't a flamboyant or fiery crusade. It was a measured, dignified stance that lent credibility to her cause. Throughout, she illustrated how personal integrity can meet intimidation head-on, proving once again that calm clarity under pressure can shine more brightly than grandstanding. In a system so often overshadowed by drama, her measured approach revealed that authenticity can still triumph. Amid the swirl of pundits and talking heads, perhaps the most crucial realization was this: people make institutions, and institutions reflect people's choices. Jasmine's trial was, at its core, a test of whether the justice system could still adhere to principle in an era when social media fury and political expedience frequently overshadow due process. The stakes felt impossibly high because every step she took was observed, dissected, and criticized by forces itching to see her fail. Yet her triumph wasn't just an individual redemption, it was a signpost for citizens nationwide. A reminder that a single voice, armed with truth, can still bend the arc of procedure. By honoring the full transcript instead of a selective snippet, the court reaffirmed that the devil truly is in the details, and that ignoring context can lead to false convictions and rhetorical lynchings. The moral tension lay in witnessing just how prepared powerful entities were to dismiss that context for a fleeting advantage. Her unwavering posture taught observers that composure is not passivity, but an active refusal to be manipulated or provoked. In a spectacle-laden culture, her calm was as startling as a thunderclap, jolting people into reassessing the old adage that the loudest voice always prevails. Instead, she showed that the most resolute argument can often be the quietest one. Perhaps the greatest injustice Jasmine encountered was the brazen assumption that her role in government granted her no room for nuanced speech. The moment she dared to frame a policy outcome in candid terms, critics pounced, reducing her stance to a caricature. The universal message here was that public figures, especially those who speak for administrations, walk a perilous line where each word can be hijacked to serve an opposing narrative. Through her ordeal, Jasmine inadvertently shed light on the fragility of democracy itself. Because if those entrusted with explaining policies are forced to muzzle honesty or risk condemnation, the public suffers from a lack of unfiltered truth. By holding her ground, she revealed the hidden cost of orchestrated controversies. They deter genuine discourse and strangle the open exchange of ideas. More profoundly, her perseverance exposed the moral vacuum that develops when policy is overshadowed by politics. Where some saw a chance to exploit her words, she saw a duty to place clarity above obfuscation, proving that a single truthful statement can defend an entire principle. Her courage resonated with citizens fed up with spin, reminding them that authenticity is not a luxury, but a cornerstone of responsible governance. And in a final poetic turn, her presence became a testament to how restraint in the face of provocation can be the most potent form of self-defense. Critically, the lesson extended beyond the walls of the courtroom and the ephemeral swarm of hashtags. The philosophical underpinnings of her story echoed like a distant drumbeat in civic classrooms, grassroots rallies, and across dinner tables. People began acknowledging a grim truth. An unchecked appetite for sensational headlines can transform innocent individuals into overnight villains, condensing entire careers and reputations into a mere handful of seconds. Jasmine confronted that reality head-on, not by unleashing fury, but by meticulously building a scaffold of fact, context, and legal principle. In doing so, she spoke to broader systemic vulnerabilities, challenging everyone to ask, how often do we judge prematurely, fueled by snippets instead of substance? Ultimately, her testament was that legality hinges on clarity, not on the theatrics of accusation. And if the public allows flimsy evidence to stand uncontested, they risk turning the justice system itself into a veritable stage where truth depends on who yells loudest. By withstanding this crucible, Jasmine modeled the power of personal integrity, the kind that cannot be overshadowed by misinformation once the full story surfaces. Her lesson was simultaneously a call for humility and vigilance, urging society to reflect on how quickly it can be roused into anger by half-truths. Another dimension of her human journey was the stark isolation she faced, underscoring how people in the public sphere are often left to weather attacks alone. To many watchers, Jasmine's calm might have seemed unshakable, but her story carried the unmistakable weight of someone who understood the stakes all too well. She reminded them that courage isn't about feeling no fear, it's about proceeding despite it. In telling the full narrative of her statement, once maliciously slashed, she signaled that context matters every bit as much as content, a crucial principle that often goes missing in soundbite culture. From the outside, her ordeal was a roller coaster of political high drama. For her, it was a day-to-day fight for basic fairness, a fight that any citizen could one day face if misrepresented by an unscrupulous system. This potential for victimization, looming over countless unsuspecting individuals, formed the crux of her moral outcry. She wasn't just fighting for her own exoneration. She was fighting to reaffirm the bedrock of justice, proving how precarious that foundation can become if left unguarded. That is the quiet heroism in her story, refusing to let cynicism overshadow principle, even when outnumbered and under relentless scrutiny. Ultimately, her unwavering demeanor carried a lesson more precious than any political label could offer. Steadfastness, tempered by clarity, is how the powerless can oppose a flawed narrative and reclaim their truth. But perhaps the most poignant element, the one that lingered long after the last camera crew had left, was how her victory illuminated an abiding human truth. We all have a duty to guard against convenience, masquerading as fact. Time and again, Jasmine could have surrendered to easier routes, bowing to pressure, cutting deals, or playing theatrics to fight theatrics. Instead, she chose the far more demanding path of due process, channeling law in its purest form, citing statutes, unveiling transcripts, and insisting on chain of custody. Each step was a rejection of a culture that craves sensationalism over solidity. This unwavering fidelity to method was not only a legal triumph, it was a moral one. When the judge declared her innocent of any Hatch Act violation and further admitted to rethinking his own reading of the statute, it felt like a cosmic alignment. Principle, normally overshadowed by petty political battles, reclaimed its rightful place at the center of justice. That was her real gift to the nation, reminding people that the law, for all its vulnerabilities, can still shine when wielded by those who refuse to compromise on truth. But she didn't do it with applause lines or false bravado. She did it with the unadorned power of evidence. At the heart of this entire saga is a deeply human lesson about identity, responsibility, and collective faith in an imperfect system. Jasmine's story did not culminate in a Hollywood crescendo. It ended in a subdued but resonant reaffirmation that justice is neither guaranteed nor automatic. It must be fought for, line by line, exhibit by exhibit, moment by moment, in front of onlookers who might be expecting fireworks. The real fireworks here were the illusions that got dismantled. The notion that unverified audio can crush a career, that the highest court in the land would sanction political innuendo, that speaking truth to power is inherently self-destructive. Instead, watchers were treated to a grounded demonstration of how a single individual, armed with facts, unwavering composure, and a refusal to be cowed, can push back against the machinery of intimidation. For every person who sees themselves as too small to matter in the grand stage of policy, Jasmine's example stands as a testament that sometimes the best weapon is clarity. Yes, the injustice she confronted felt suffocating, but it proved powerless against rigorous evidence and the calm conviction to present it. In the aftermath, her voice resonates as a clarion call. Trust the process, but also hold it accountable. When law and sincerity meet, even entrenched systems must pause and listen. In the end, the legacy of this case transcends the swirl of social media, the sudden spate of televised debates, and the rush of academics dissecting Jenkins versus United States Civil Ethics Commission. Its real impact lies in how it reminded a weary public that the law can still function as it was meant to, provided people are willing to stand their ground, to pay attention, to question, and to demand transparency. For every cynic who believed that the fix is always in, Jasmine's unwavering grace in the face of hostility offered a counterstory of human decency and institutional redemption. That doesn't erase the unfairness she endured, nor does it mean every case will resolve so favorably, but it plants a seed of possibility. It tells us that the system, though flawed, isn't beyond reclamation. It warns us against complacency, reminding us that silence in the face of weaponized half-truths can be as dangerous as the lies themselves. And it challenges future defendants, judges, and ordinary citizens alike to see the law not as a blunt instrument, but as a precise tool, a scaffold upon which justice can actually stand if given the chance. Ironically, it took a near-fatal blow to her reputation to reveal this possibility. And so, the real moral here is about forging resilience, truth and compassion under pressure, ensuring that no fleeting spin can overwrite the steady hum of honesty. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.